Thanks for having me. Um, yeah, so I'll kind of run through some of the things that we do with an emphasis on community conservation and using native plants at your home. So I always like to start, but from the beginning, at least for my my sake. Why are we involved with all this stuff? Because there are so many good things in New Jersey. We really are blessed with a variety of habitat types, and with that comes lots of really cool plants that we have out there. Oops. So we have 2,000 native plants and lots of cool animals as well. It's a pretty for a pretty populated state. We do have a lot of bit of wild left. We have timber rattlesnakes and black bears, bobcats. We have globally rare northern meadowlark butterflies. A stronghold of their population is here in Jersey. We have bog turtles, which are a federally listed species, and again, having a stronghold in New Jersey. So there's a lot here to protect, a lot here to enjoy. And our broad goal is always to have um, healthy habitat. We can't manage every single species individually, right? And that's not really the goal. The goal is to have healthy habitat so all those species can thrive. Um, so in a forest, you have, you want things from your tallest oak trees on the top down to smaller oak trees and other species, then shrubs, and then seedlings of all those things. And then on the very ground level, we should have forest herbs like trillium and bellwort. And unfortunately, that's not what we're getting in most cases. And it is all on us. We've definitely made a mess out there. Pretty disrespectful generally towards nature. We've destroyed lots of habitat. We've led to problems of overabundant deer and invasive species. Where soil has been modified by past agriculture, our forests are weedier. Um, we've changed fire regimes. If you go back 500-600 years, there's thousands of years long, essentially a management scheme, by indigenous people that used fire for lots of things, and it led to a very diverse habitat, suite of habitats, I should say. And we've sort of pulled that out. We've altered stream flows, we've fragmented habitat, and on the biggest scale, we've changed the climate, and it continues to change. So these things have lots of impacts. Um, One of the biggest problems that we've created is a deer overabundance of deer. So basically, we've made excellent deer habitat, and we don't have very good deer management, and it leads to this cascade of issues. Lyme disease, deer vehicle collisions, agricultural losses. The impacts on agriculture are tremendous. Landscape planting losses and degraded forests. So this is a sort of a picture of Hopewell with forest, how the forests are arranged there now. So there's a good amount left, 15,000 acres, but all this sort of yellowish tan is non-forest, and deer love to eat along the edges of these forests. And these areas are filled with agricultural fields and people's backyards. And basically, we've super amplified, we've revved up their food source. So it's not surprising that there'd be a lot of them. Simultaneously, we removed their predators, right? There's no cougars, there's no wolves. Um, and it just led to an out of balance, overabundant deer herd that's impacting all those forest bits that are still left. And invasive species are sort of very closely tied to the deer issue. Um, and the bottom line for why are they bad? Invasive species are essentially representing a breaking of the food web. So I have an example here. Um, in the old days, even going back to even the 80s, even the early 80s at least, When a field was abandoned, it would be filled up with a whole suite of native species. And this is just a tiny subset of what would be there. And they would produce fruit and flowers and seeds throughout the entire year. And if you were any kind of animal, you had resources available to you. Um, Now, in sort of our modern world of a field being abandoned, it can be quickly filled up with an invasive species. I'm using autumn olive as an example that essentially replaces all these other ones. So why is that bad? Well, in May, if you're a bee and it's infested with autumn olive, it's good times. There's so many flowers. You are sitting pretty in May, but when June comes, now what do? Now there's nothing for you there. Um, and if you're someone, an animal that needs fruit in September and October, great, there's lots of fruit. What do you do the rest of the year? So, just using fruit as an example, there's fruit available throughout the winter in the old system where there was lots of native species. Fruit available in the winter, not too much in the early parts of the year, but this is the time of year where birds would be raising young and eating insects. And then the fruit starts coming in and stays again through the rest of the year. So basically, if you had access to a supermarket once or twice a year, you would be dead, right? You need access to it every single month, and so do our fauna. So basically, you're really simplifying habitats, and there's been dramatic reductions in insect populations and in bird populations over the last 50 to 60 years, and invasive plants are part of it, and overabundant deer are leading to these infestations. So these species all here, the great majority of these are very yummy to deer. So they eliminate these, they don't eat these, and these take over. It's a pretty simple thing, actually. And then that leads to cascades and breaks the food web. So that's just some background on some of the impacts that we're most concerned with. Um, so back to just who we are. Um, we're a nonprofit land trust, and you can read our mission here: preserve land, protect natural resources, and inspire the next generation. Um, and we do a lot of work, which I'll show you some examples of. So stewardship is a huge part of what we do. We really do have a good focus and a great team of people that are practicing stewardship at Friends of Hopewell Valley. And the idea is to mitigate human impacts. I mean, that's sort of one way to define stewardship in this context is we're mitigating human impacts. And types of things that we do outreach and trails, we do preserve management, we do rare species science and stewardship. We have the invasive species strike team, and what I'll focus on for the majority of this talk is community conservation program. So there's 37 miles of trails, 17 of which we manage directly, and others that were on land that we co-own with partners. We have almost 2,700 acres of preserved open space across 27 preserves and 14 easements. And we have some great partners locally. So we've over historically, I believe we're approaching our 40th year in a couple of years. But we've done a lot of work organizationally over that time, and a lot of that, especially initially when the coffers were a little flusher from government, state, and local government to buy land. We bought a lot when the getting was good, and we've protected quite a bit of the Hopewell Valley. Our outreach involves guided hikes and educational events, training sessions, corporate volunteerism, and volunteer stewardship teams. Um, so that's the last one is where we try to get folks to sort of independently, we assist groups of volunteers to sort of adopt a park, and we try to help them in any way we can, guide their efforts. We don't do that work directly on that particular item, but we try to facilitate it. And any way that you can get people out in nature, touching nature, it's very much underappreciated in our modern society, and it's just great to get people out there doing things. When we do our stewardship work, we're guided by um, this sort of hierarchy. And as you might just even from the brief amount of background that I gave, you might imagine that deer overabundance is the biggest issue, and that's what we like to try to do as much as we possibly can on. And then the sort of working your way up the pyramid, invasive species. And then finally, if you could restore, if you have enough resources to restore, we selectively, will restore things based on available funding. Just trying to, again, mitigate human damage to natural areas. And so we do deer management. So this is our program from the beginning when it started in '07. And, I'm not going to go into every detail on this, but the general idea is doing deer management is different than just allowing hunting. You basically want hunters who are going to take a lot of deer, so that the population will go down and then the impacts will ease on nature and nature could start recovering herself, which does happen when everything lines up well. So we basically encourage hunters to take deer in order for nature to heal herself. And we do measurements, right? So we're scientists and stewards, and we've done lots of detailed measurements across preserves and multiple, on the same preserve over multiple years, 2007 to 20. So obviously our goal is to have about 70% native shrub cover, just to give you some sense of the level of damage that's out there. The lovely Arena Preserve started less than 5%, and now it's about 17%. So that's over a 13-year time period. So these are very small preserves in the bigger scheme of things, and our effects are sort of slow and marginal over time. But what we hope is that deer management becomes a bigger thing outside of our preserves as well, so recovery could be sped up. But you can see that there's positive results in various places, and just the scale of how positive it is can vary. Um, we do a lot of our work here at Baldpate Mountain. And you can see that there's been a positive trend there as well. So there are marked improvements. They're just a little bit more modest than we'd like to see. I'll give you some examples of rare species science and stewardship. Um, so we do work with rare plants, which I'll talk about more specifically, but we also have a really amazing American Kestrel nest box program. And, we're sort of snuggling up to about 100 chicks per year out of our boxes, which is fantastic. And we've been told it's one of the best programs in the state. We just have great habitat in Hopewell, and all they needed was nest boxes, which replace, very old trees that would have died and had cavities. That's what they would have naturally nested in. Because of all the past harvesting and development that's removed many trees, they just lack a place to put a nest, even though their habitat exists otherwise. So we've been able to capitalize that, and we're very proud of how many kestrel babies have come out of the boxes that we've made available to them. And yes, that is a venomous snake. That is a northern copperhead. And we've learned quite a bit about those, and we try to help them in every way we can. They're part of the ecosystem, and one of our main goals is understanding them enough so that we could avoid human snake conflicts interactions. So we've learned quite a bit about them. And I'm just going to give you examples of some of the rare plant work we've done. So there's one particular location at our at Baldpate Mountain that we lovingly refer to as Hackberry Hill, and has 4 rare species in one relatively small area: green violet, yellow giant hisshop, redbud, and also dwarf hackberry. And so it was definitely getting heavily challenged by, as you might imagine, deer overabundance and invasive species. So we initially made some small exclosures, and then we made some, larger but still modest sized exclosures to keep the deer away from them. Tree of heaven is a very notorious invasive species, and there were many thousands of them that we treated. So we've increased the amount of sun reaching these rock outcrop habitats where some of these rare species require. We've done other invasive species control work, and I'll show you a picture of this, but it seems strange, but we actually did raking and removal of debris on the rock outcrop. That was basically debris from all the invasive species that had settled on these rocks. And this is what it looked like towards the beginning when we started clearing these rock outcrops off. So you can see they're kind of covered with debris. And many of the trees have been killed at this point. But we were literally raking the woods. We were pulling all of this debris off of the rocks. And the result, if you don't have a trained eye, this might not be overly impressive, but each one of these bundles right here is a very rare plant called green violet. And you can see they grow out of the cracks in the rocks. But so much leaf material had piled up on these rocks that they were being suppressed and then also being eaten by deer. So, this brought big smiles to everyone in the stewardship team's faces when we saw the result of our work. It was just absolutely the lushest growing species that you will ever see coming out of a rock in your entire life, and they are a rare species in New Jersey. And you commonly, when you don't have deer fencing around them, they would look like this. So this right here turned into these. So that's the huge difference in their health. And they were producing fruit, which is what any plant ecologist wants to see. They want to see that the plants are creating seeds and able to grow their population. And just very simple graphs, but they're very make a very good point of what was done. The yellow giant hyssop went from several individuals to over 700. So this is stewardship when it's working pretty much at its best. The green violets, which I had been showing you, they started with about 20 or so fruit, the whole entire population. And then they were up to almost 350 by 2022. So, when I prefer, often I don't refer to it as stewardship. When I'm talking to people, I talk about it as getting the hell out of nature's way. We've laid such a burden on her with deer overabundance and invasive species and habitat destruction, et cetera, et cetera. I always see stewardship as getting out of her way. And when we do, this is how she responds. And it can be really, really fun to see. We also, at the statewide level, we work, we have the strike team, and which is a program within Friends of Hopewell Valley. And basically that's coordinated strategic invasive species management in order to protect natural areas. And the strike team has been around since 2008. You can see what we've done, lots of searching, lots of detecting, and killed a lot of the population of these invasive species. But these numbers are sort of important, right? We've found this many and gotten rid of this many. You can never keep up. So what you learn when you do invasive species, that you have to be extremely selective. We didn't try to kill every invasive species at Bald Mountain, but we cleared in areas around these rare species, rare plants, so that they can flourish again. And one thing that I would encourage anyone to do is currently there is no legislation in New Jersey that restricts the sale of any invasive species. Unlike 45 plus other states in the country, we're very, very far behind, embarrassingly so. So what we do with our technical advisory committee with lots of experts on it is we create a do not plant list of our own that's clearly just voluntary. We're a nonprofit. We have no regulatory powers. But we ask if people would help, help nature out by not purchasing plants on the do not plant list. So that's on our website and updated annually. So this is kind of fun stuff that we do with the public, and I'll spend the rest of my time talking about this. Um, Community conservation. So currently we have about 300 or so participants. Property sizes range from the smallest to quite large. And when you add up all those participants, it's about 4,000 acres are enrolled in the program. So that's a huge, and you can see in the map, the pink highlights as of 2023. It ends up adding up to be quite a lot. So we know that we can't do everything ourselves. That's crazy, right? So we hope to get other people interested in doing stewardship on their own properties to help nature where they live. And why are they important? So the bottom line is, of all the fantastic work that's been done to preserve natural areas and farmland, it's still only maybe 30% of the total area of the Hopewell Valley. So what of the other 70%? We're not, our name is Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space. It isn't Friends of our own preserves. We want to be able to, um, fulfill our mission across the entire valley. And we obviously would need lots of help doing that. So we try to help encourage private landowners to participate in stewardship. There's different levels of participation. Native plant gardens is probably the thing that we do with most of people that are in our program. And I'll have some details on that. For folks that have, beyond just a yard, but also some land, meadow and forest habitat conservation, wildlife conservation. I had mentioned the Kestrel program. The great majority of those are on private lands. So again, it's about incorporating, getting everyone into the game, get everyone into doing stewardship at some level. And because we need everyone, we wouldn't be able to have claimed all those beautiful hatchlings without boxes being on lots and lots of different private lands. I mentioned we do deer management, and we do invasive species management that I've already mentioned. But we do those on private lands as well. So native plant gardens. So the way our program is structured, if you're a member of FoHVOS, you're eligible for a home visit. You get a customized list. There's lots of resources on our website. And one of the really neat things is if we pool orders, so that allows us access to wholesale nurseries. So obviously, any individual can't go to a wholesaler and say, I want 3 of something. That's not what they do. But we come to them with pooled orders from people, and now all of a sudden we can get wholesale prices. And what that mostly means is that more native plants end up in more yards, which is great. So if you're going to, one of the basic questions is how will you use native plants in your yard? A garden examples are pretty typical, right? Everyone won't have, many people have a garden, and you can get your native plants into them. And they could be as casual or as formal as you want. It doesn't matter whether the species is native or non-native. A native plant garden could look exactly like this, or it could be a little bit more casual like this. If you want less maintenance than a typical garden bed, you can go to a meadow kind of a system. So you have less control, but you also have less maintenance. I'm only somewhat joking about the socially acceptable part. It's becoming more and more acceptable over time. And one of the sort of really easy tricks is giving it a shape. So if you have a meadow in a particular shape, and in this case, it's all wood chips around it and lawn here, people have no problem with that. If the whole place is let go and let go, so to speak, which I think is a good thing, maybe it looks like you're just not mowing your lawn. So I always suggest to people, if you can have whatever size meadow you want, but if you're in a sort of somewhat normal, typical suburban setting, You might want to just give the patch a shape, and at least people know that you're not letting your place go. And when I talk about native plants for home, I try to sort of categorize them by types or functions. So we'll go over some examples of meadows, foundation plantings, screening, ground covers, and shade gardens. That's generally how we present things. And if you go to our plant store on our website, they're arranged that way, or you could sort them that way. So I'm just going to give you an example of lawn to meadow. So we get this question a lot, and it's a good thing because lawns are pretty much dead ecologically. There's not a lot going on there. They're horrible for our watersheds because water just runs right off of them. It doesn't really infiltrate them. Um, you just have like a dense layer of roots like that, and it's compacted by running mowers over it all the time. So water hits a lawn, and most of it just runs off, ends up in our streams, and erodes the stream banks because it comes in so hard and fast. So making a meadow is a really good thing, not just for your own local spot and increasing biodiversity, but also for watershed health. Especially if you can get lots and lots of people to do it, then it could add up to improving watershed health. So, one option, and this is the option that I've done at my place in multiple areas, is take your time, build diversity up a little bit by a little bit at a time. So the first thing you would do in this case is you would just stop mowing. Um, the lawn grasses themselves, the species that they are not really the problem. It's the fact that they're mowed so low and the ground gets really compacted over time. If you let just grasses in your lawn go, it starts to come to life. You start to get grasshoppers, then you start to get bluebirds eating the grasshoppers. And that's really, really obviously you don't do anything. In this case, you stop doing something and good things start to happen. And then to sort of spice it up, to add those wildflowers and things like that into it, you could eliminate grass in patches as you're ready to add native plants. So there's various ways you could do that. You could use herbicide or a tarp. And I'm willing to share this presentation if anyone's interested. If I go too fast or you want to see this, I'm happy to share this so you have this and can look at it at your leisure if you want specifics. But yeah, so basically you have to clear the grasses. So in order to get new plants to get established, you have to get the old plants out. So if you wanted to create a 25 square foot area of wildflowers within your now newly uncut grasses, you would eliminate them using herbicides or a tarp, and you would buy 50 plants, which you could buy wholesale in one tray, and you would cover 25 square feet. So you're putting them pretty close together because you want them to not get overwhelmed by any kind of other weeds that might come in. And then you would just start mowing annually. And then preferably you want that to be higher. You don't want to mow it like you had mowed your lawn to like 2 inches tall. You want to kind of keep it higher off the ground. And part of the reason is that for overwintering, insects could be living in hollow stems and things like that. So you want to keep it a little high so that they can survive. And the mowing is just done to prevent the establishment of trees and shrubs. A question I get a lot on meadows is, do I leave it up and brown all winter or do I cut it? And it's an appearance thing. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say, well, a brown meadow looks lovely in February. Um, but that's my point of view. If I were a white-throated sparrow or a dark-eyed junco, I would think it was the most beautiful thing in the world, a brown meadow, because it's filled with the old seed heads and that feeds them all winter long. So it has an ecological function. Might not be what humans typically think of as beautiful. But again, if you're one of those winter resident birds, it's quite beautiful. So leaving them up is recommended. If it's intolerable for any reason at all, you can mow it in, November or December. And the plants will be fine and they'll come up and they'll be there for all the pollinators all summer long. So that's the option one, the patient land steward. Option two is if you want to go for it all at once. So basically you can start from green grass here and turn it into a lawn, turn it into a meadow. And it's the same thing. You have to clear those grasses the same way I mentioned in the previous slide. And then you have to think about whether you're doing seeds or plants. If you're doing plants, it's the same rules as I just mentioned. You want to buy twice as many plants as the number of square feet. If they're seeds, whoever's supplying those seeds will have recommendations for how many to buy for a particular sized area. Not necessarily useful for home use, but typically, and if you do meadows at large scales, you're talking about maybe 10 to 15 pounds per acre. So you can kind of scale that down, right? If it's much less than an acre, it's going to be a fairly small amount of seeds, pound wise. And I often recommend doing a combination of the two. So clearly the number of plants you can potentially get from seeds is much larger than buying individual plants, right? But the individual plants will mature faster. They'll keep weeds away. You're more likely to have a successful meadow. And if the meadow area is not huge, you could literally buy every plant that ends up being part of your meadow. If it starts to get a little too expensive for you, typically a flat of 50 plants is going to be in that range of about $100 plus dollars. So you could say if you had 25 square feet, that might be reasonable. If you had 2,500 square feet, then that starts to get more expensive, right? So maybe you could do some plugs and some seeds to fill in the gaps between where you plant your wildflower plugs. So a method that I like to recommend is a particular species called black-eyed Susan. Everyone knows black-eyed Susan. There's tons of different kinds. There's one in particular that's good from growing from seed. Um, and you could do half your area with plugs, half your area with these black-eyed Susans, and it would be, a very beautiful and functional meadow for bees and butterflies. And these are kinds of plants that you could use. I mean, they're just absolutely stunning, right? The orange background is butterfly milkweed. Um, then there's common milkweed, that's the one on the bottom, and then in the middle is purple milkweed. Um, all the milkweeds are amazing for pollinators. I think that's my next slide. We'll have that. But you'd want to think carefully about which ones you use. So common milkweed, I would say flower by flower is the heaviest hitter. It's the pollinators come to it in droves. They smell lovely, really nice perfume, and they spread like crazy, right? So they send runners out and new shoots. So if you have a meadow, that kind of situation, fantastic. If you have a garden bed situation, probably don't want it. At least in not that bed setting. But the butterfly milkweed and the purple, they would be very tame and great for a garden bed. And it's just, you get your monarchs, obviously. This was a great year. I had lots of fun at my place this year, just watching monarch caterpillars and chrysalises and the adults. Obviously you'll get bees as well. They're fantastic for pollinators. It's a very solid choice. And deer do not eat milkweeds, which is great. But it isn't just about just about monarchs. This purple milkweed has all kinds of interesting things on it. I've never seen a bumblebee with stripes like that. Um, I think that one's called the perplexing bumblebee. I think that's its name actually. But there's regular bumblebees, these cool bumblebees, different kinds of flies that actually pollinate things. Fritillary butterflies were in droves this summer. It was a good year for them. And you get the whole food web, nature is nature, right? So this fly looks like he's not quite at the right angle, right? If you look very closely in there, there's a crab spider that was living in the flowers. And when the fly came in, it grabbed onto him, and that's its meal. So, that's all circle of life kind of a thing, right? But that's what nature's about. Another really good one that's very resistant to deer is foxglove beard tongue. And this is very much a bee plant. So bumblebees love foxglove. Um, and they just sort of wedge their body into these flowers and, getting their nectar and pollen rewards, and then carrying pollen to other plants and fertilizing them and, getting that next generation of plants going. So, meadows kind of have, and it's just, this is a meadow, this is the kind of meadowy look, right? So at this point in this year that these are going, like coreopsis are in the background, and there's other species that aren't flowering yet. So they basically light up at different times. Perennials aren't like annuals. Perennials will flower for a few weeks, each species, but if you have enough species, there's always multiple things flowering simultaneously. But they have their moment, they shine, and then they settle down. And then other species come in. So that is the beauty of the meadow. Um, Another really fantastic pollinator plant is mountain mint, and there's various species. There's uh, at least several, I don't know, 4 or 5 commonly used species, but they're all just amazing for pollinators. And also they're in the mint, so you can make teas and things like that if that were something you like doing. And that mintiness really does keep deer. Deer don't like them. Humans like mint. Deer don't like mint. Wild bergamot. Now, this is another one you consider how you want to use it. It's great for a meadow. Could be used in a garden bed, but it's also pretty rambunctious in a garden bed. So it might not be exactly what you want, but you see these, lavender flowers lighting up your meadow, and that will definitely bring a smile to your face. And if your butterflies in particular love these, and I've actually had hummingbirds also come to these as well. They have that tube-like flower that hummingbirds are attracted to. I had a hummingbird feeder up, and they would alternate between the feeder and my wild bergamot when they were out. Um, so yeah, that's some of the good little, very little fast snippet of what meadows hopefully get your interest. Um, and this is another common thing that happens in yards is you get these tree islands, and I'm definitely in the thinking they're boring pool. So they're great. It's good to put not to have grass growing right up against your trees because then you mow and the mower gets close to the tree, it scars it, it hurts the tree. So it's great to have a buffer around your tree from your lawn, but that pile of wood chips could be way better, right? So some really simple things would be neat mass plantings. If it were in your front yard and you want to just sort of have it look maybe lush but neat, you could do single species things. You could do native, these are all natives, Pennsylvania sedge, northern sea oats, or ostrich fern. I love ferns in particular. And all of these are things, again, I'm sort of hand picking out of all the native species. Unfortunately, the great majority of them are deer eat them. But fortunately for us, there are many native plants that deer don't eat that could look good in your garden. Um, Another option is to do what I call a shade meadow. So this has, there's lots of different choices of native species. Again, these are ones that deer don't eat and that can handle shade, columbines and bleeding hearts and cardinals, blue lobelia, etc. Ferns, any of the ferns could be added to the mix. Violets are sort of underrated, but amazing native plants. And there's, when you say violets, if you're not familiar with plants, there's actually blue violets, there's also yellow violets, and there's white violets. So you can have a really cool combination of colors using violets. And here's some examples, miterwort and foam flower. These are really good ground covers if you're looking for that kind of a thing. And, just the intricacies of them are absolutely amazing. Cardinal flowers, there's nothing redder on this planet than a cardinal flower. And these are definitely hummingbird plants. So they're beautiful to our eye. They're useful for wildlife. It's a win all around. Bleeding hearts, also same thing, just absolutely stunning plants. And, the little known secrets of nature is, the seeds, when this makes seeds, they have a little thing called an elaiosome, which is basically a little bit of fat attached to their seed. And ants will say, I would like to eat that fat. And they carry the seed to their nest. They eventually, tag team like ants do and get the little bit of fat off of it. And then they dump this in their waste pile with a lot of ant poop fertilizer. And then the seeds can grow out of that. The new plants can grow out of that. Columbines, and these are, if you're anything like me, maybe that's not a good thing, but if you're a person who really craves spring very much, usually starting around December 20th, I start craving spring. Um, this plant is one of the first ones that come out, so this is going to be in early to mid-April, and it's just very sight for sore eyes kind of a situation. They're obviously stunning, and those bees are even happier than me to see it. So yeah, if folks want to talk some more about any of these things, I'd be happy to. Maybe I'll do a stop share.
Yeah, we have one question in the chat from Christopher in Virginia. He asked, does the increase in the coyote population bode well for deer control? And I think that speaks to a larger question, which is, every state faces unique challenges in their own ecology and environment.
Sure.
What are some universal frameworks or best practices for identifying and addressing invasive species that can be, adapted to different regions and states?
Yeah, no, invasives are a universal problem. I mean, globally, invasive species are definitely an issue every last place you can imagine, more or less. Um, maybe not Antarctica, but yeah, generally they're everywhere. And I would say every state has some kind of, it might be called an invasive species council. Um, uh, there's something called weed warrior programs that are out there in multiple states where it's basically people volunteering to maintain parks, to steward parks. Um, yeah, there's a lot of resources on invasive species that are out there, and obviously they could be unique to your own spot, your own state. Um, I mean, I could think of ones that jump out, but yeah, I would say most states have either an invasive plant council or something like that. There's also regional groups. There's like a Mid-Atlantic group, a Northeast group. And I'm sure there's a number of Western groups as well. So yeah, I would say there's probably, you type invasive species in your state name, and then I'm sure something will come up.
Great.
Um, Deer, unfortunately, are also a pretty widespread problem throughout certainly the Northeast into the Midwest. So it is actually a problem that, I don't know if you're all 50 states, it might not be a problem in Arizona or something like that, but it is a problem in a large number of states. Um, and the use of native plants is pretty universal as well. I mean, um, we have, what we call community conservation. There's other groups around the country that do have similar programs. So like some nonprofit entity who works with private landowners, and you might want to check out. There's a organization called Village and Wilderness out of Massachusetts, and they have links to all kinds of different programs that are similar to what I've just described in other states. Now, it's not every state, but there's a number of them, maybe a couple dozen around the country. Um, so you might be able to find something like what I just described in your own neck of the woods. And oftentimes I would say, I'd assume just about every state now also has a native plant society. So that would be a place where you could figure out, what are the native plants that I can make a meadow with in whatever state you live in. So native plant societies are a fairly um, common thing across the country.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and I just put village and wilderness in the chat.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, Jeff is asking, can you talk more about tilling and how it might be used in restoration efforts?
Yeah, typically not. Um, but if it's like in your yard, um, you could do tilling in lieu of, strategic tilling in lieu of herbicides or tarping, right? So if you till enough times, you're going to kill all that grass. If you're going to convert grass to a meadow, for example. Um, but the one thing that tilling does is that it brings up weed seeds that were low and brings them up high, and then they germinate. So if you're going to do some kind of tilling, you have to be aware that you're going to have to do it multiple times to essentially burn those weed seeds out of the soil you're bringing to the surface. Um, and any meadow situation, the more prep you can do, the better. Um, and if you were to go tilling, I would do it probably um, multiple times over the course of a year. Maybe you start in the spring doing it and you do it several times, and then by the fall you might have burned out most of those weed seeds and you can plant into it. Um, so
Would that change in the context of for like cemetery managers? Because Jeff made a great point where it's, we're talking acres of land management. So
right,
tilling be like in that context?
tilling typically is not done for meadow creation, certainly not at that scale. So at that scale, you probably tarping would be pretty impractical at a large scale too, right? It's more of a home scale. Um, the only, I don't, and again, everything will depend on where you're starting from and where you want to end, right? But if you have an area that's not meadow and it's filled with brambles and things that you don't want, getting a meadow established in there is going to be pretty challenging. And you'd probably need to do an herbicide application, followed by probably a couple herbicide applications, followed by seeding. And it, there's specialized seeders for native plants, seeds of native plants and grasses, wildflowers and grasses. Um, and it basically is Truax is one of the brand names, but basically it's a set of discs that go through the ground, leave a little furrow, drop the seed in, and cover them up a little bit. So you're not tilling the ground like as if you're going to plant corn, right? You're planting wildflowers. So, you don't have to do it like a massive tilling to get it established. You basically, the most important thing is to remove the competition of things that are not going to lead to a biodiverse meadow, and then use specialized machinery to get those seeds into the ground without doing a lot of disturbance of the soil, which would bring up a ton of weed seeds that you'd rather keep buried and inactive.
Great, thank you. And I'm just taking a look personally at the community conservation residential map, and it's so impressive, not just in scale, but also in the variety of like sizes of acreage. We
Hmm.
talked a lot about like just converting lawns, which I'm pretty sure cemetery managers could take to their local community. But just in general, like maybe for the larger acreage, how do you engage with those folks in native planting and just community conservation on that larger scale?
Yeah. Yeah. It's relatively, all right, well, you could put it this way. If you own a lot of acres personally, you probably have enough money to convert some of that to a meadow. Just by, obviously a large acreages or cost a lot of money. And that if you have a lot of money, you're more likely to have a lot of resources to make a 10-acre meadow all by yourself, right? We don't do that as a land trust. We don't do a 10-acre meadow unless we have a grant from someone to do it. Um, but in your context, it's sort of an investment, right? It's part of the whole thing. Part of I'm not going to speak for what your whole thing is, but I'm imagining that it's an important element of what you want. You want a natural cover that's serving nature. Um, and it really just comes down to what exactly are you looking for? So the first question to ask practical wise is, are you okay with using herbicide or not? And that would dictate where you could possibly go from there. Without it, it could be really challenging. So I was at the site that was being considered for green burial in Hopewell. And it was covered with poison ivy, and that is not going to be a friendly place for anyone to come visit. So the decision has to be made, what do I do about that? And if it's not herbicides, then, the only other possible way would be to just keep mowing it like grass, mowing it until you create grass, essentially. Because when you mow an area over and over again, anything that isn't a grass will eventually die off, including the poison ivy. And then maybe you could start restoring from them, but that's a slow boat. That's going to take time. So, it's a tough decision. And I think, you know, it's not like I got into this game because I loved chemicals and putting them on the ground. Um, but you basically come to the conclusion at some point is I cannot practically do very much without them. And, I'm not trying to be a spin artist here or anything like that. But, the general way we look at chemicals, like herbicides is that, um, they're poison, right? We're actually talking about putting plant poison, right? Herbicides kill plants, not people. But, the other way to look at it is that it's medicine. If you can get rid of acres of invasive plants that serve very little value ecologically and lead to the death of bazillions of bugs and birds, then I think, if you have to hold your nose, hold your nose and apply that herbicide and get a really diverse cover down that feeds, you know, butterflies and bees for many generations. So, it's a decision that everyone has to wrestle with.
Yeah, thank you. We have two more questions here. One is Jersey specific. What plants do you recommend for marshy areas or low-lying woodlands? I'm on a New Jersey commission that preserves an 800-acre preserve that includes a mix of land, most of which are wetlands. What
Okay.
smaller native plants would you recommend for wetlands?
Okay. So wetlands you could break down, right? You could break it down into a shady area or a sunny area. I believe I heard shade. Um, but some of the species that I mentioned before that you could put in an upland area near a house, but their habitat is wetlands, like cardinal flower, great blue lobelia, monkey flower, Helen's flower, um, uh, turtle heads. There's lots of different native wildflowers that could work in a native or work. They are from wet woodland habitats. Um, and you could use the filters on our plant store to try to see what pops up when you kind of sort for different things. Um, and I think there's a lot of resources out there too, generally. For finding plants that work in a situation that you want. Jersey Friendly Yards is a website that has some good resources on it. Um, but yeah, there's essentially a plant for any condition you could imagine. And it's just a matter of, do you like the way they look and are they available to buy? Um, but yeah, so for shady wet areas, I mentioned a few. For drier wet areas, you could use things like swamp milkweed. I'm sorry, sunny wet areas. You could do things like swamp milkweed, the Joe pies. They're pretty good for that thing. Vervain. There's if I collect my thoughts, I can think of, a couple dozen for either of those two situations. So they are things that are out there and available. When you look at a native plant, either on our plant store or if you go to other native plant nurseries in New Jersey, like Wild Ridge Plants or Toad Shade or something like that, they'll often say like their moisture requirements. So they use different symbols. It varies by nursery, but you could use those websites for nurseries to help you pick plants for the spot type of condition that you have.
Great, great stuff. And last but not least, Natalie has the same question I do. Natalie says, They're working with a new natural burial ground on community engagement around conservation and connecting with nature. I would love to hear experiences from others about lessons they've learned on that front. Yeah, I really would love to hear too. What are some like key practices or lessons you would recommend just from your community conservation initiatives to engage with local residents?
You know, so we are so we have a lot of private residents, and one thing we did this year is basically go visit each other's properties, right? So we had 3 events this year, and they were so successful that we're going to probably do more, or hope we do more next year. But that community aspect, um, it isn't just sort of whistling Dixie, so to speak. We really want that, and that's what really builds interest up. Um, so when you can talk to, so I am, whatever. Yeah, say I'm an expert. I'm an expert. You could talk to someone who's an expert, and it's very different than talking to someone who's another person, two non-experts talking to each other, where one of them has tried a bunch of things, and the communication there is very different and also extremely strong. It helps people move from the realm of possibilities that I talk about to what people have actually tried, and what has worked and what hasn't worked. So a lot of communication between folks is really critical. And so much has happened in Hopewell. There's such a community has been built organically. It's not just us, but there's Facebook groups where they exchange plants with each other. They do seed swaps. They do all these different kind of events have popped up by building community. Um, so getting those people connections is really important.
All right. Thank you. Such great insight, Mike. Thank you so much.